Well, former Vice President Joe Biden says he's not looking forward to possible impeachment proceedings against President Trump, but that it might be Democrats' only option. The 2020 presidential frontrunner spoke at a campaign event in Concord, New Hampshire last night.
If the president does not soon start to cooperate with the legitimate investigations of the Congress, then, in fact, the Congress has no option but to begin an impeachment inquiry. I'm not looking forward to an impeachment process, and I really mean it. I think it will be a gigantic distraction on things that, in fact, we should be focusing on getting done. And the truth of the matter is, though, that there is a constitutional obligation. My job is to impeach him a different way. Beat him.
Well, several of Biden's primary opponents have said that it's time to begin impeachment proceedings, despite House Speaker Nancy Pelosi once again pushing back against those earlier calls. CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey Burns joins me now. So he says, I don't think you should do impeachment, but I think you have no option.
Right. Well, he's starting to kind of thread the needle a little bit here, trying to speak to those in the Democratic Party base who want some kind of accountability for Trump after the Mueller report and after Mueller himself came out. You saw this real pivot within the Democratic primary of candidates calling either for impeachment proceedings to begin or calling for the president to be impeached. So that is kind of the trend that we're seeing here. But there's a difference between calling for impeachment and calling for the proceedings to start. And that's really what Biden is talking about. And that's something that Nancy Pelosi is trying to weigh within her own caucus, whether and how to move forward with this and doing so in a careful manner.
You know, Biden also came out saying he supports the Hyde Amendment, which would, for folks who's not familiar, it would ban the use of federal funds for certain abortions. Why did he come out to say that?
Well, this is a really interesting part of the primary right now where you're seeing Democrats really take a more aggressive stance on abortion rights. And that comes after we've seen at the state level measures passed in various states to ban abortion, even with extreme cases. And so you saw a reaction to that among all of the candidates. So more so than before, abortion rights are kind of front and center of the Democratic primary right now. The Biden support for the Hyde Amendment is really significant because you've seen all of these other candidates come out and start to denigrate Biden over this, though not mentioning him by name. And we're at a point in the primary where just a few weeks before that key debate in Miami, that first debate, and all of these candidates are trying to jockey for positions in the Democratic primary, and they see Biden as the front runner. And he also has been kind of ostracized a little bit by the left flank, and they've been going after him on a variety of issues. Now, it depends kind of how Biden sees this and whether he does reverse course, but he has been trying to position himself as someone who is kind of center ground and someone who can defeat Donald Trump. Then you have other candidates saying, look, we're not looking for middle ground in this primary, and using it as a way to attack him.
So speaking of issues, you know, climate change, everyone seems like they came out at the same time with their climate change proposals. Are they any different? Who stands out to you?
Well, it's really interesting because this is a top issue that we're hearing over and over again from voters. And there was actually a CNN poll released several weeks ago that showed climate change among the top 3 issues for Democratic primary voters. And what we're seeing in terms of these plans, there's not a huge difference. The big key difference is the sense of urgency around it. So Biden's plan would work for net zero emissions by 2050. And some climate change activists say that that is just not soon enough. They want to see action more quickly. So that's where the difference is in terms of the scale of these. Yeah, the timeline.
So meanwhile, I've got to ask you about Bernie Sanders, who attended, who addressed Walmart shareholders today. He was pushing for a fair wage. I want to play that bite for you.
Last year, Walmart made nearly $10 billion in profit. It paid its CEO over $20 million in compensation, and it has authorized $20 billion in stock buybacks, which will benefit its wealthiest stockholders. Surely, with all of that, Walmart can afford to pay its employees a living wage of at least $15 an hour.
So he's also going to call for an introduction for employees, a proposal to put employees on the board. Is this going to make a difference? Like, do you actually even see this happening?
Well, it's really interesting to see the candidates really go after corporations head to head. I mean, he was presenting at the annual shareholders meeting in Arkansas. We have seen calls for an increased federal minimum wage, something that Bernie Sanders championed in 2015 and 2016, now become kind of mainstream in the party. And this is a way for candidates to really go after these corporations, and they think that that really resonates with parts of their base. Cory Booker has also talked about going after these stock buybacks that Walmart has done, and it's really aimed at the American worker. Because remember, the economy looks good on paper, and Democrats are trying to figure out a way to message to voters who may not be feeling the impact of that economy. So you're seeing them go after the Republicans' tax law that they say that benefited corporations more than actual working people, and you're seeing them champion things like the minimum wage, go after corporations for their practices in dealing with workers. And so this is an issue that is really taking hold in the Democratic primary, and it's interesting to see Bernie Sanders, who has slipped a bit in the polls, and other candidates have kind of taken over his mantle, Elizabeth Warren among them, going after these issues and trying to take this fight directly to them.
So knowing that he slipped and wages are so important, wage equality is a huge issue, do you think that this will make some sort of comparative difference, especially if, we haven't even really heard from Walmart on this issue?
Yeah, it really remains to be seen, but you are seeing candidates see this as an issue. And Bernie Sanders' whole MO in this campaign is to say, look, I've been championing these issues for a really long time, and I made them mainstream in the party. The fact is, or at least the notion that we're seeing from voters and in these early polls, is that other candidates are embracing a lot of his ideas, and that's also starting to resonate with people. And so Elizabeth Warren and some others have started to kind of creep up in those numbers as Bernie Sanders has fallen a bit. So it remains to be seen kind of whether his coalition remains intact, how it's going to other candidates, and who are the beneficiaries of that.
Before you go, I want to ask you about Beto. Our Elaine Keanu has an interview on Red and Blue, 5 p.m. today, where she's going to talk to him about a series of things. But one thing that I understand she's going to bring up is this constitutional amendment that he wants to limit the term for Supreme Court justices. Right now they serve for life to single 18-year term. Is this going to make a difference for him?
This is a real interesting issue in the Democratic primary. We saw earlier this year Democrats talk about expanding the number of seats on the Supreme Court. And this is really in a response to this idea that they are pushing forward big and bold and new ideas that they don't think stand much of a chance of getting through Congress. And so you're hearing them talk about things like executive order, hearing about them talking about changing the makeup of the Supreme Court, or at least how long people serve on it, in response to the latest that we've seen from the court and elsewhere. So this is an issue that is starting to resonate within the Democratic primary, and it's a way for Beto O'Rourke to stand out, because he had been criticized for not having a lot of policy proposals. I have been seeing a lot of support among Democrats for this proposal, also in the context of broader voting rights.
But is this really an issue that's going to drive people to go vote or support him? I mean, you mentioned his polling recently.
It remains to be seen. I think voters want to see from candidates what their ideas are, because they're talking about a lot of ideas, but how they would actually get them done. And that is the big question for some of these voters. So it remains to be seen whether this is something that differentiates Beto O'Rourke. I think we'll see on the debate stage, especially kind of how these candidates maneuver around each other, whether they decide to take on Joe Biden by name, and how they believe that their policy proposals can set them apart, if at all.
Caitlin Huey Burns, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.